Journal continues.
And we're back with Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, sits on the Foreign Relations Committee and Homeland Security. I want to get to the topics of Iraq and Homeland Security threats. But first, if I can just begin with where we started with our viewers this morning, and that is Speaker Boehner's decision to sue the president over executive action. Do you agree with it?
Well, it's kind of sad that it's come to this point. You know, I have my own lawsuit against President Obama because he's, you know, basically governing through unilateral executive fiat. Executive orders. He's changing laws. You know, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives the president any power to change, amend, or repeal laws. And that's really what he's doing. The president is supposed to faithfully, he shall take care to faithfully execute the laws, and he's simply not doing that. So, by the way, it's not just conservative Republicans that have this viewpoint. Self-described liberal law professor Jonathan Turley has been testifying before Congress, and he said that we are at a constitutional tipping point. This president has crossed the line. You know, our founders were geniuses. They set up this tripartite form of government. Each branch is supposed to defend their own powers, act as a check and a balance on the other two branches. And certainly during my lifetime, I've seen presidential power expand at the expense of Congress, and it threatens our freedoms. It threatens the delicate balance.
There is a check, critics say, and that is the power of the purse by Congress to not fund these initiatives.
Well, it's a pretty blunt check. And you know, the other thing we need to realize as well is only about a third of the government is actually appropriated. 2/3 is mandatory spending, entitlements, and that's on automatic pilot. So you know, even when we had the last government shutdown, you know, I know it created a lot of uncertainty. I don't recommend it. You know, I don't support it. But a very small portion of the government actually shut down, and most Americans didn't even realize it. So that is a blunt instrument. It's not one you actually want to use. And you know, I actually support the judicial system getting involved in this constitutional crisis. I mean, the judiciary has been largely absent, and in many respects, you can say maybe appropriately so. But when you have a president who has taken his signature piece of legislation and he's changed it 38 times, now maybe some of those are legitimate discretion, you know, his executive discretion. But, you know, for example, my lawsuit about the Office of Personnel Management ruling granting members of Congress and their staff special treatment under the law, Congress debated that provision. It's clearly not what the law intended. If the president doesn't like the law, and I would agree with him, there's most about Obamacare I do not like. He needs to come to Congress to change it. He can't do it through just executive fiat.
Let's go to Iraq. What do you make of the president's strategy? Do you support putting the 300 advisors there and possibly taking the next step of drone strikes?
Does the president really have a strategy? I mean, that's what's so sad. I mean, his strategy was one of withdrawal. And you know, what is so tragic about what's happening in Iraq right now is I don't think it had to happen. I think what is happening right now was predicted. It was predictable. And by withdrawing, by not leaving a stabilizing force in Iraq, we blew what I think was a historic opportunity to show that Shia and Sunni and Kurd could actually get along in a coalition government, work together for shared prosperity. You had that opportunity, but that opportunity was only going to be realized if America stayed there, like we did in Europe and Japan and South Korea, leave behind a stabilizing force after we sacrificed so much, almost 4,500 lives, 32,000 wounded, $850 billion spent. President Obama came into office and Iraq was largely stable. His job was to maintain that stability and hopefully increase it. But the only way we could do that is by leaving American troops behind to pressure Maliki to have a true coalition government. As soon as we bugged out, Maliki started governing as he did, you know, just purging his basically the government of any ethnic members other than Shia, and so it created great enmity with the certainly with the Sunnis, and the Kurds are taking care of themselves up in the Kurdish region. So you know that area right now is stable. That ought to be one of our goals. One of our strategies right now is let's make sure we help the Kurds maintain their stability, defend their territory.
So that answers in your opinion, the why. But what to do now?
Well, again, we need to do everything we can to help the Kurds stabilize Kurdistan. Quite honestly, from my standpoint, I'd rather have the Kurds governing Kirkuk and Baji and Mosul than Al-Qaeda. What's happening right now is, this is a term that the Wall Street Journal, I think, I first read it there, we are witnessing the creation of the state of Al-Qaedistan. And that is an incredibly dangerous situation for world peace, certainly for regional peace. And so we need to help the Kurds stabilize their region, do everything we can to make sure Baghdad doesn't fall. We need to absolutely protect the American citizens that are still in Baghdad. But again, this is a tragedy. This is a very grim situation, and what's sad is I don't think it had to happen.
What do you make of the papers today saying that while the president has sent 300 advisors, there are going to be up to 1,700 private contractors sent there, security personnel, to protect those 300 advisors? Well,
we need to protect Americans that are there. We really should be reaching out to the moderate Sunni tribal leaders, the people that helped us in the Anbar province and during the surge, and see if there's any hope of putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. But I don't know. Again, we've heard the assessment. It is pretty grim. So what we need to do, we have to recognize that reality. And again, where we can provide stability, we need to do so. We need to really do everything we can to help the Kurds in the north.
How do you do that? Attract the moderate Sunni with Nouri al-Maliki in power?
Well, it's pretty tough. And of course, this administration's been pretty open in their call for certainly a better leader in Iraq than Maliki, and even the Grand Ayatollah has basically indicated that as well. So no, I don't think there's any way you're going to get moderate Sunnis really rejoining coalition government with Maliki in charge.
So he has to go?
Well, if you have any chance of reassembling that coalition government, I'm not sure that's possible, but if there's any chance, Maliki can't be at the head of it.
To protect Baghdad, to protect Kurdistan, the Kurd region, do you think that there also needs to be action in Syria against ISIS?
We have to recognize that we are in a war against Islamic terrorism, and we're going to have to confront it wherever it exists. And right now it exists certainly in Syria as well as in Iraq. And we have to understand that. We had a debate in, President Obama about a year ago declared the war on terror over. I don't think anything could be further from the truth. So we need to recognize that reality. We were debating whether or not we should, what we should do with the authorization for the use of military force. I think President Obama initially wanted that repealed. The administration came before the committee, and we were asking, what is the administration asking for? Does he want a modification? Does he want it repealed? Right now it authorizes use of force against al-Qaeda and associated groups. I'd say right now what you see in Iraq is al-Qaeda and associated groups. So I think President Obama still has that authority, and he better maintain that authority, because you cannot have an effective response to terrorism managed by 535 members of Congress. I mean, we're going to have to react quickly. Unfortunately, this president doesn't seem to have it in him to take the forceful, resolute action that may be required.
We'll get to calls here. We're talking with Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin. Harold, you're up first in Lafayette, Louisiana, Republican caller. Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call.
Good morning.
Good morning. I would like to ask two questions about the issue of the executive orders. My first question is, isn't this really a partisan issue? And then my second question is, haven't previous presidents issued controversial executive orders, and so therefore this is nothing really new? And I'll take my call while you respond. I'll leave.
Well, Harold, appreciate the question. I think it's a totally nonpartisan issue. Hopefully an op-ed I'm co-written with the liberal law professor Jonathan Turley will run here pretty quick. But people on both sides of the aisle need to be very concerned about this. There's no doubt about it. This has been a bipartisan problem. Presidential power has been growing at the expense of Congress for decades. That is true. But I think the point we're making right now, and I think what Jonathan Turley certainly recognizes, is that this president in particular has crossed the line. Take a look at Obamacare. 38 times now he's changed the law. The employer mandate was, it's very explicit. It says it shall be mandated after December 31st, 2013. President Obama delayed it. Now, shall doesn't give you a whole lot of wiggle room, a whole lot of discretion. But this president continues to do that. And at some point in time, I think Congress, in order to uphold our solemn oath to support and defend the Constitution, we have to defend congressional power, and I think that's what John Boehner is doing, and I support him in his efforts, and obviously I support my own lawsuit against this administration.
Okay. We'll go to Sherry in Oklahoma City, Democratic caller. Hi, Sherry.
Hi. I've listened to Mr. Johnson and other Republicans like him who, talk about the illegal moves that President Obama has made, but they can't give any specifics. Whenever you go into a court of law, you can't just make up any abstract ideas about how you feel. You have to have some facts. And if you're saying that for him to tweak the ACA is a violation, the very law that you all hated from the inception, then you all don't have a leg to stand on. I think if anybody needs to be sued, it's Mr. Johnson and John Boehner for wasting so much tax dollars. You all have done absolutely nothing since you've been in office. I mean, absolutely nothing.
Okay, Sherry, let's get a response from the senator.
First of all, Sherry, I gave you a very specific example in terms of employer mandate that shall be implemented after December 31st, 2013. And in my own case, my lawsuit is really addressing the fact that President Obama has granted special treatment to members of Congress when the Affordable Care Act specifically said that members of Congress certainly can't purchase their insurance through the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan anymore. They had to purchase their insurance through the exchange, and it was debated and actually voted on that no employer contribution could be made toward those purchase plans. And now, Democrats in the Senate didn't like that. They went running to President Obama, even though the Office of Personnel Management originally ruled as the law was written. President Obama said, no, that's, I'm getting a lot of heat from my Democrat senators here, change the law. And he did so. And so now I've sued this administration. I believe I've been harmed. It creates an administrative burden for me because of the unequal treatment under the law. I didn't want it. I did not want that. And as a result, it's creating enmity between myself and division between myself and constituents. And that's a pretty precious commodity in politics, and it's a real harm when that advantage is broken.
You do have to show personal harm
Correct.
In these lawsuits. When it comes to the lawsuit that Speaker Boehner said he's going to file, where's the personal harm?
Well, Speaker Boehner is trying to establish something called legislative standing, and there's a couple of legal experts that have basically posited this theory that at some point in time, Congress should have the power to challenge that at some point in time. Congress should have the power to challenge the executive when their powers are being eroded. I mean, that is a collective harm that's being done, and I think that should establish standing. And the judiciary has got to get involved in this. Otherwise, our, again, tripartite system of checks and balances is going to be destroyed, and our freedoms will be threatened.
Let's go back to Iraq. Monty Laban on Twitter asks, is ISIS and similar groups we label terrorists nothing but armed political parties in the Western sense?
Listen, I think terrorists are people that, certainly they're not affiliated with a nation state. They are not following the rules of the Geneva Convention as it relates to how to conduct a war. They are committing acts of terrorism, car bombs and suicide bombers, and we've seen the beheadings, certainly executions without any trial. So no, these people are terrorists. They're not lawful combatants. They are unlawful combatants. So they are absolutely terrorists, and they want to kill Americans. They do not like the West. They don't like the modern world, and they are really, absolutely bent on its destruction. And we've got to fight them. We can't put our head in the sand. We denied the fact when Al Qaeda declared war on us. We just didn't want to believe it. And as a result, the Twin Towers came down and thousands of Americans were slaughtered in that. So, I wish it weren't so. I wish this threat didn't exist, but it does, and we have to face it.
So if we have to fight it, as you say, then do you support airstrikes to fight them? Do you support boots on the ground to fight them?
I'll have to see what this administration's plan is. I do not want to aid and abet Iran getting greater influence inside Iraq. Possibly a better scenario would be, again, help stabilize the Kurdish region, and if we're going to have any operations, I'd maybe rather do it from Kurdistan, but we also don't want Baghdad to fall either. So this is an incredibly complex, difficult situation, and again, the real tragedy is it didn't have to happen.
Peg on Twitter. Senator Ron Johnson, we support dictators, then we don't support dictators. Do we fight every religious civil war?
No, but America's role in the world, I believe, is to convey, through hopefully excellent example, what our values are. The values of personal liberty, freedom, free market competitive system and democracy. And where we are able, and where it's necessary, it's in our national interest, we need to provide stability. So again, we should have left a stabilizing force to keep Iraq stable. Now our opportunity is let's make sure that Kurdistan remains stable. Let's not force Israel into a destabilizing agreement. Let's do everything we can to support Poroshenko, and let's help him stabilize eastern Ukraine. So you have to look at every instance on its own merits. You know, what is in America's national interest? One of the problems we have, though, is we live in a global world, and what happens halfway around the world absolutely does affect us, can represent a real threat to our national security. But it's really up to the president, who's got the bully pulpit. He needs to make the case to the American public, and he hasn't. He didn't do it with Syria. And so when it came down to crunch time and he drew a red line and Assad had used chemical weapons, President Obama couldn't rally America, the American public, behind his suggestion for action. So it really does, you know, so much of this depends on strong presidential leadership. I mean, I can carp from the sidelines all I want, but I'm a pretty small voice. It's the president that we elect to lead in this situation, and he is the commander-in-chief.
On Syria, does the president deserve credit for Syria getting rid of most of their chemical weapons, that they have winded that program down?
Well, that was where we had a shared interest with Russia, quite honestly, but it came at a real cost. So yeah, I'm glad that the reported, the admitted chemical weapons have now been largely removed from Syria, but they're still using chlorine gas, and we really don't know what other chemical weapons still may be in Syria. But no, I'll give the administration credit for at least working with Russia in our shared interest of removing those chemical weapons, but it came at a huge cost. Now Russia has far more influence in the Middle East and in Syria. Assad is not gone. You know, Syria is a tragedy. 9 million displaced Syrians, 2.5 million over the border, and destabilizing places like Jordan and Turkey. And obviously it's destabilizing Iraq. I mean, what is happening in Iraq is a direct result of how Syria spun out of control. Again, President Obama is not causing these conflicts, but there's opportunities for America to help stabilize regions. This president has always rarely acted, and any action he's taken has been way too little and way too late.
I want to put another issue on the table, and that's a domestic one, but could be a national security issue as well, and that's the children that are crossing over from Central America across the Mexican border into the United States on the southern border. Here's the headline in the Washington Times: illegal children to remain in the United States for years. House Judiciary had a briefing about this, a hearing about this yesterday, where they talked to Border Patrol officials, and Robert Vitello, who's the deputy chief at the Border Patrol, Customs Border Protection at Homeland Security, had this to say about these minors crossing the border.
In 2002, passed under the Bush administration, the law, it's the Homeland Security Act of 2002. Then there's the human trafficking law passed in 2008 under Bush also, that talks about how we treat people that come in across, especially the kids. There's a big difference in this. This is not a Mexican problem. It's a Central American problem. 75% or more of the people coming across are from Central America. How we treat those people under the law, under the current law, is this. If you're from Mexico or Canada, Homeland has 48 hours to determine what kids you're going to send back to Mexico or Canada. 48 hours before you place them. But the way we're doing the Central Americans, they get them, they process them, they get a piece of paper, the permiso, the notice to appear, not appeal, but to appear, and then they can travel anywhere in the U.S. except for the kids are put in locations and placed and fostered. So I think, in my opinion, we need to change the protocol with those Central American countries, just like we have with Mexico and Canada, where within 48 hours we have to determine whether they stay or they get removed back to their countries.
Senator Johnson, obviously that was not the hearing, but that was Congressman Henry Cuellar, who was our guest here on the Washington Journal yesterday. And that's the idea he's proposing to address this situation, that you change the protocol with these Central American countries right now so that you don't have these children, as the Washington Times says, remaining in the country for years.
Well, this again was the predictable and predicted outcome of not securing our border. I mean, that's what we're seeing here. Is we have provided incentives for people to come here illegally. And probably the most recent one is President Obama's, again, what I would consider an unlawful executive order, the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, which basically has created an incentive, certainly created an impression in Central America that, boy, if you can just get across the border, you're going to be able to stay. And so we've incentivized, we've induced people to come across the border, and so they do. We provide welfare benefits to non-U.S. citizens, so we entice them over, we incentivize them to come. And so from my standpoint, the first step, and I want to solve this, our illegal immigration problem. I want to solve it, but it has to start with securing the border. And you do that across the board in a number of different actions. I mean, you actually have to increase border security, but you need to reduce or eliminate those incentives for illegal crossings. You actually have to have a functioning guest worker program. You have to have interior enforcement. 40% of illegal immigrants are here on visa overstay, so there's a whole host of things that we need to do. We need to start there. First action, secure the border. Then we talk about the other things. I think one of the problems with the comprehensive approach, it lays everything on the table. The borders have never become secure. All those inducements are in place in the comprehensive, and we're seeing the very predictable and predicted results of that. So I'm not fully aware of exactly what the congressman was proposing there, but we need to take action, but we need to really understand what our actions have caused in the past, what incentives we're creating for illegal crossings. We need to end those incentives, and we need to secure the border.
Well, let's listen to what the Border Patrol had to say yesterday at the hearing over on the House side.
For the past 3 years, the Rio Grande Valley area of Texas has experienced a significant rise in illegal entrants, including increased amounts of unaccompanied children and family units, mostly from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. The recent dramatic increase in unaccompanied children is difficult and challenging on many levels. To date, this fiscal year, the number of unaccompanied children encountered by CBP is over 51,000. They have more than doubled as compared to the amount encountered over the entire previous year. Today, there are just over 2,700 unaccompanied children in CBP custody. The Border Patrol's Rio Grande Valley sector has expanded its enforcement actions against identified South Texas campaign criminal targets and illicit networks, using resident and detailed personnel and resources. The Border Patrol has augmented Rio Grande Valley's personnel with additional experienced agents detailed from across the southwest border, allowing the sector the flexibility needed to gain more interdiction effectiveness, situational awareness, and increase its operational footprint in targeted zones within its area of operation. These children are an especially vulnerable population. While in CBP custody, unaccompanied children are generally separated from unrelated adults. They are provided drinking water, food, and medical assistance. While these basic necessities and facilities may be adequate for a short-term stay, CBP facilities were not designed or were services not in place to accommodate large volumes for an extended period of time. We are working closely with ICE, our DHS, and other federal partners to surge resources, personnel, facilities, equipment, and supplies to quickly, safely, and humanely screen, then process children in accordance with the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, and support the transfer of custody to the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement.
Senator Johnson, what did you hear there?
Well, obviously it's tragedy, and it's my definition of a real problem. Solutions aren't going to be particularly easy, but one of the things we're hearing is that it'll cost us over $2 billion just to take care of these children. And let's face it, we're a compassionate society. We're going to try and do everything we can to take care of them. But again, that gets me back to the main point. One of the things we're hearing is that there are radio ads in Guatemala, in El Salvador, and Honduras, basically telling people, send your kids up here. America's a great place. Or come on up here, and they're going to give you a permission slip, and you can stay. We need to counter that. We need to counter it with real information about how they are being trafficked as humans. And there are rapes, and there are murders, and there are broken bones, and they've got this train called the Beast where these children are, it's the most inhumane conditions. We need to get that information down to Central America to combat the other propaganda that's luring children in here, again, for profit, for the drug cartel and the smugglers. So we need to get that information. We need to secure the border. I'd much rather be spending that $2 billion on surging resources to the border to actually secure it. To me, that's what we really ought to be doing, but we obviously are going to have to take care of this humanitarian crisis as well.
All right. Well, Christopher's in Old Bridge, New Jersey, independent caller, has been waiting. Go ahead, Christopher.
Hi, how are you?
Morning.
Thank you for taking my call. Yes, yeah, I'm a little concerned. I think there's an issue that actually Democrats and Republicans can get around together, because I keep hearing about all this infighting, and it's very discouraging. But I'm concerned about, like, munitions that are being used in Iraq and Afghanistan, because when I hear about the soldiers coming back and they're sick, and then there's stories you don't hear about them being sick, and the Veterans Administration scandal that recently resulted in Shinseki's resignation, I'm concerned about the use of depleted uranium munitions over there. And I read an article in the Christian Science Monitor a couple of years ago that actually the green zone is radioactive, that there are actually munitions that were used that were causing cancer over there. So I would wonder if there would ever be like a Senate investigation committee into that.
Okay, Senator Johnson.
I have to be honest. I'm not aware of the situation. Obviously, it's something to be concerned about if there's validity to it. So I'll certainly check into that. I am concerned about the weaponry we left behind for the Iraqi army that is being overrun, that is being basically utilized now by ISIS. I mean, it's again one part of the tragedy, part of the grim reality of what's happening in Iraq right now.
Tilt on Twitter responding to what you said earlier about President Obama's decision to leave in 2011, saying, Senator Johnson, didn't the Status of Forces Agreement signed by President Bush, I think referring to 2008, prohibit us from leaving troops behind in Iraq?
President Obama had an opportunity, and the way I hear the story told by people who are pretty close to negotiations is Maliki actually wanted to negotiate a much greater in-depth strategic partnership long-term, and the Status of Force Agreement was just an absolute table stakes part of that. The administration apparently wanted no part of that. Maliki understood that our generals were recommending a minimum troop level somewhere between 20 and 23,000 troops. When the administration came in to negotiate the Status of Force Agreement, they basically laid 10,000 on the table, and then continued to ratchet the number of the number of troops they were willing to leave in Iraq down to the point where Maliki, just to save face, this is what I've been told, secondhand, basically threw out the "we can't grant you immunity" just to save face. So, as the story's been told to me, this president had every opportunity. If he wanted a Status of Force Agreement, he could have had it. He could have actually had probably a more robust long-term strategic agreement. But President Obama, again, ran on the platform that he was going to end the wars, and I think that was his primary strategy. He just wanted to bug out. He wanted to be able to tell the American people, we've achieved the peace, we're coming home. But the problem is you have to consolidate this peace. You have to stabilize the peace. He didn't recognize that. He didn't learn from history where we'd done it in the past and it worked. I guess he hoped for the best. Let's face it, his campaign slogan was hope and change. Hope is not a strategy, and we've seen that his strategy of withdrawal was a total and dismal failure, and we're living with those consequences today.
We'll go to Melissa next in New York, a Republican caller. Hi, Melissa.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call this morning. Just a real quick point earlier for Sharon that called in. If you're looking for something that Obama did to violate the law, he did not give Congress notification when he was negotiating to trade Bo Bergdahl for 5 Taliban prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. So that's one thing. Secondly, being that Senator Johnson is part of the Homeland Security Committee, I just wanted to know, since there has been a loosening of restrictions on travel in the United States, and maybe restrictions, loosened on visas, with this latest issue with ISIS or ISIS, is there going to be a tightening of those kind of restrictions in the future?
Well, there should be. I mean, we need to be concerned. Again, part of my problem is this president is putting us back on a footing pre-9/11 where they're treating terrorism as a crime. And it's not. I mean, it really is far worse than that. And the threat is growing. And we need to recognize that fact. So that's one of the reasons, when we actually captured one of the perpetrators of Benghazi, rather than say we're going to put him on a ship and eventually bring him in, and probably sooner rather than later, into the court of law, my suggestion is we should ship those individuals to Guantanamo. I've been down there. It's a beautiful facility. People are treated with incredible humanity. It's probably best living conditions these people have ever lived in. But talking to the interrogators, the way you get intelligence out of these individuals is over a long period of time, just relentless questioning. You keep subjecting them to questions after questions after questions over a period of years. And that's how you really gain intelligence. And if we're really going to secure our nation, our best line of defense against international terrorism is a robust intelligence gathering capability, and when we have an opportunity to capture somebody and that individual might have intelligence, we need to extract every ounce of that intelligence to help us fight that war.
And that's the debate over this Benghazi suspect that has been that has been aboard a Navy ship making its way to the United States, headed to Washington, D.C. This suspect will be tried in a D.C. court. The New York Times reports that he has been cooperative so far, according to officials, though it's not clear whether he had been warned of his rights to remain silent or be represented by a lawyer.
But again, when I talk to the folks down in Guantanamo, the people that are expert at this, there's no way you can extract all the intelligence in a few hours or a few days or even a few weeks. The valuable intelligence comes out over years. And I'm sorry, these people are terrorists. They are unlawful combatants. They don't have the right to trial. They don't have the rights of a U.S. citizen. They're unlawful combatants, and we have the right, under the Geneva Convention, to hold these people indefinitely while this conflict continues. And unfortunately, this conflict continues. Well,
the New York Times also reports this detail, that the ship that this suspect is on is made from steel from the World Trade Center towers. Its motto is "Never Forget." And it typically carries 4 Osprey aircraft and 2 helicopters aboard.
Well, again, it seems like this administration is forgetting the lessons of history, and we shouldn't.
We are all out of time, Senator Johnson. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to our viewers. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on.